And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage the Society's President and CEO, Cyndi Zagieblylo.
Thank you, Eli, for all you do, for your terrific dedication, and for that wonderful video. That was just phenomenal. I recognized a few people on that. It was just great. Shared promise. I love this theme. And what is a promise? It's a declaration that something will be done. It's a commitment. True promises are all about commitment. In a very real sense, our personal integrity is defined by how we hold ourselves accountable to what we promise. We lose faith in others quickly when it becomes apparent that promises were just words with no commitment behind them. And yet, who among us cannot remember one time or another where we found ourselves unable to make good on a promise? For me, I'm most likely to break the promises I've made to myself. Be more patient, eat less sugar, sort out those family photos by Thanksgiving. When I make a promise to myself, I only disappoint myself when I fail to fulfill it. And let's face it, life happens. We make a promise, and then something interferes. Maybe we find ourselves inadequately prepared, or the task is bigger than we thought. And being human, sometimes we just forget, or in the case of that sugar, we lack willpower. And the promise is broken. And therein lies the beauty of a shared promise. When we share a commitment, when we own our promises together, we are not only accountable to ourselves, we are also accountable to and for each other. You have my back, and I have yours. And it's a good thing, because together we have made one whopping big promise to the millions of people who live with MS. It's the reason we're here. We promise to work to create a world free of MS. This is our vision. And it is the promise that we have shared since our organization was founded by Sylvia Lowry in 1946. 1946. It's amazing to think back on those times and the state of science and research back then. Antibiotics were the new miracle drugs. Jonas Salk was about to begin work that would lead to the polio vaccine, and it was generally accepted by scientists that heart surgery was impossible. Remember that quote by Christopher Reeve? So many of our dreams at first seem impossible, then they seem improbable, and then when we summon the will, they soon become inevitable. Keep that in mind while I tell you this story. In the same decade that the Society was founded, an unlikely trio came together to share a promise. And the story of this promise is a remarkable one. Dr. Helen Tozig was a pediatric cardiologist practicing at Johns Hopkins. A clinician of great compassion, she focused her practice on the treatment of children born with holes in the septum of their hearts. They were known as blue babies. Some lived a few months, some for several years, but eventually, virtually all succumbed. Tozig was deeply touched by the courage of her tiny patients and the heartbreak of their parents. She refused to accept that nothing could be done. She made a promise to those parents. She would not rest until there was a treatment to save these children. Like Sylvia Lowry, who searched for others who wanted a cure for multiple sclerosis, Helen Tozig began to search for others who would share her promise. When Dr. Alfred Blaylock came to Johns Hopkins as head of surgery, he was already famous for groundbreaking work on treating traumatic shock. He had barely unpacked when Tozig was in his office pleading her case. Couldn't it be possible to bypass the heart in surgery, allowing for repair? Blaylock already had a full plate, but Tazig would not take no for an answer. She badgered him at every opportunity until he agreed to have his lab assistant, Vivian Thomas, begin the work in the lab to test Tazig's theory. Thomas was an unlikely medical collaborator. He had gotten into medical lab work by accident. You see, Vivian Thomas was the grandson of a slave, the first in his family to graduate from high school. Thomas dreamed of becoming a physician, but in those times, that dream was out of reach. When he was laid off from his job as a carpenter, he landed in Blaylock's lab working for next to nothing. And it was soon apparent that his abilities were remarkable. And so, when Blaylock took the job at Johns Hopkins, he had one unusual demand: a position in the lab for Thomas, who had the most gifted hands Blaylock had ever seen. Now, it's hard for us to imagine today, but because of his race, Thomas was classified and paid as a janitor, even though he was doing the work of a postdoctoral researcher in the lab. So now we have our trio: Tazig, Blaylock, and Thomas. And they had almost nothing in common. They often disagreed, but each made a commitment. They shared a promise. They had to figure out how to collaborate and set aside the differences in personal agendas, so not one of them could succeed without the knowledge and talents of the others. And as doubters challenged the practicality of their work, they had to be unified in their resolve. It's like that for us in the MS movement, too. We come from different perspectives. We do not always agree, and sometimes we are angry and frustrated. Collaboration is not easy, and we are at times tempted to just forge ahead on our own. But our shared promise binds us together. It keeps us going when the going gets tough. Our work is not always exhilarating. It can be grueling and tedious. There are inevitable obstacles and setbacks, and those who doubt and criticize. But there are also those who can help if we bring them in and share a promise. In the Hopkins Surgical Lab, Vivian Thomas was obsessed with perfecting the bypass technique that would not only save the lives of Helen Tazig's precious blue babies, but also would change the accepted paradigm of the medical establishment. The time finally came for Blaylock to try Thomas's technique in a human. And to the astonishment of observers packed into the operating theater, the renowned surgeon put aside his own pride and called the unknown technician from the lab to stand at his side and coach him. These observers watched as the little blue babies turned pink. The impossible proved to be possible. Tazig had the vision, Thomas perfected the technique, Blaylock applied the technique to humans, and the world was changed forever. The world had not changed in every way, however. The prejudices of the time were entrenched. And while honors and recognition were lavished on Blaylock and Tazig, Thomas was not invited or included in the photos, dinners, articles, and speeches. Understandably hurt and angry, Thomas submitted his resignation and for a brief period returned to carpentry. But within months, he swallowed his pride, set aside the injustice, and visited Blaylock asking for his job back. Why? Blaylock asked. Nothing has changed. To which Thomas replied, because now I know. Now I understand. It's about the work. Nothing else really matters. I should tell you that Vivian Thomas eventually did receive the recognition he had been denied for so long. He returned to Johns Hopkins and dedicated his life to laboratory science, expecting nothing except the opportunity to do the work he so loved. Eventually, as social attitudes evolved, Thomas's genius was finally recognized publicly. Toward the end of his career, Vivian Thomas was the director of surgical research laboratories at Johns Hopkins, where he became a mentor to many of Hopkins' most renowned graduates in their medical schools today. This man with a high school education and unprecedented talent was awarded an honorary doctorate by Johns Hopkins. Dr. Vivian Thomas's portrait hangs in the archives of this great institution today, along with that of Alfred Blalock and Helen Taussig. In his memoirs, Thomas expressed appreciation for the accolades, but reiterated what he had learned. Personal fulfillment is not about recognition. It's the daily work towards something important that is the reward in itself. And there it is. It's the same for us. It's about the work. It's about fulfilling the promise we share and putting aside anything that stands in the way, including our pride. It's not about recognition or even appreciation. Sharing a promise means focusing on what really matters above all else. And look at how far we have come. 20 years ago, there were no approved therapies that would change the course of MS. You may even remember the days when some physicians had the diagnose and adios reputation. They saw the complexities of the neurological and immune systems and believed that nothing could be done to treat MS. Thankfully, not everyone believed that nothing could be done. Just 2 decades later, there were 9 approved disease-modifying therapies, with dozens more in the pipeline. Now, we do not have a cure, but progress and so much hope. Just last month, more than 7,000 scientists and clinicians from all over the globe gathered in Lyon, France, at the largest conference focused on multiple sclerosis. 7,000 scientists and clinicians sharing one goal: advancing treatment and research in MS. Those who attended came back charged up about the promise for the future, treatments with greater efficacy, and even research to promote nervous system repair, once thought by most to be beyond the reach of medical science, once thought to be impossible. Today, the heart surgery that was thought to be impossible is performed every day, thousands of times. Today, when a baby is born with a hole in his heart, the doctor tells his parents, "We can fix this." In MS, too, what seemed impossible 20 years ago is beginning to look inevitable. Someday soon, when a person is diagnosed with MS, the doctor will say, "We can fix this." And success begets success. Once there was one heart surgery, others followed. Once there was one treatment for MS, others have followed. We have more to do. We have launched a worldwide attack on progressive MS. Researchers and clinicians are coming together to combine their expertise to figure it out, and they'll need support and resources. It will take passionate, dedicated people to make sure this next step happens. Treatments for people with all forms of MS. It will take people who will not give up, people who know it is the work that matters. Who are these people? They are us. There is no them in our movement, just us. You, me, every person who wants to do something about MS now. We are the people who will end MS. Like Helen Taussig and Sylvia Lowry, we will beg, bother, and badger anyone we think can help. If they say no, we will ask again and again. No one of us can fulfill our promise alone. We need each other. Our promise unites us. We won't let anything get in our way. No obstacle is too large. No challenge is too hard. Nothing can stand in our way. What was thought to be impossible will become inevitable. Do not doubt it for a moment. Our movement is growing, bigger, stronger, faster. We can see the finish line. We can taste the victory. We will be relentless, united by our shared promise, and our determination, our resolve will bring the day. It will bring the day when no one hears the words, "You have MS." Thank you.